Alrighty, hello everybody. So in today's video, I've been noticing that everyone has been talking about Lilyland, of course, because of the new anime. And one of the things that was actually brought to my attention recently is that there is another source of Lilyland information besides the ones that I've already presented in my previous video. And that is actually from Zani. And Zani, if you didn't know, in her fashion skin actually reads a book. So when Zani is kind of like leaning on her shield or in a chair, she pulls out a book to read, but when you select her fashion skin or the alternate skin, it is actually a Lilyland magazine as opposed to a regular book. So I've actually kind of like taken the time to manually translate it, and it has been revealed there's quite a lot of interesting information about Lilyland that is not very well known at the moment. So of course, in this video, we're going to be running through all the information and new details that we have discovered from this magazine. So, as you guys can see here, this is Zani's magazine, or the Voice of Fashion. It is literally just called Voice of Fashion, and on a lot of pages is a Lilyland special. As you can see from a lot of the photos, we have taken photos with shaders from multiple angles, basically manipulated the images in order to make them legible. So this is going to be, as we said before, from Zani's alternate skin. You can kind of see over here. And this took a really long time. We had to basically compile and then skew and then fit and flatten, filter, do some color grading, just to make a lot of these photos legible, translatable to a degree. That was not very easy. So if you find any of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video rather interesting, I don't think it'll be too much to ask, just like perhaps just like sub, or since a lot of you guys actually subbed actually, sharing the video if you find it interesting, that would be much appreciated. So without any further ado, let's get into what we're going to be talking about. So first things first off, Zani's book, besides some duplicated pages, actually has 4 unique pages in total. And of course, because I am fully aware that you guys want to get into the details immediately, we're going to go through and split this video first off into some key observations. We'll be going through and basically talking like reading through these in the latter half of the video in case you guys are interested, but to save everyone's time, we're going to basically run through some key observations. So I think the most important observation that has been gleaned from all these magazines is that there is a third big family in Renacida besides the Montellis and the Thessalias. This has been mentioned several times within the magazine, and they are called the Fisher family. And the Fisher family, because of the fact we haven't heard about them in Septimont or in Ragusa so far, are most likely going to be based in Lilyland. And there is a specific sentence within the magazine that tells us that the Fisher family is allied with the Montellis both legally and commercially. And I find that very important. I'm going to talk about why later exactly that is. But besides that, I'm going to talk about them a lot. They do run the largest art museum in Lilyland, that's also said within the magazine. And because of that, they are oftentimes going to be very heavily involved in cultural affairs, such as heading the Lilyland Fashion Week, because the Lilyland Fashion Week, a lot of the exhibitions are actually held within the Fisher Family Art Museum. And we know about the Lilyland Fashion Week already because some NPCs in Ragusa talk about going to Septimont's Great Aegon and then afterwards going to Lilyland's Fashion Week. So we already know about the existence of this event, but the magazine actually talks about this substantially. So next thing I want to talk about before we go into the second observation is a little bit about Renacida's family, since we are going to be introducing a third family into the mix. So if you guys remember from my Carlotta video, if you haven't watched that, feel more than free to watch that. I talked about how the Montelli family is very heavily based on the real Medici family. The Medici family being a very prominent family that had not only cultural ties, but was very famous for their banking arm. The Medici Bank was basically the most uh, famous and powerful bank during the height of the Medici's power, and that actually is reflected within the Montelli Bank and the Alvarado Vault. The Montellis are very heavily involved in banking. And Besides that, the Medicis were also a very big patron of the arts, and you can see that all over with the Montellis. Montellis have tons of art in Alvarado Vault, and half of Carlotta's character is just basically being an art collector, right? So not too much we need to kind of like discuss there. Let's move on to the Thessalians. So, in my Cantarella video, I discussed that the Thessalians are actually based on the Spanish Borgia family. And the Borgias are a prominent religious and legal family, very kind of like infamous for getting up to some sketchy business. But what's very important is that they were opposed with the Medicis. I think they were both in Florence. They were kind of like Rome, Florence, that kind of area. They were both opposed to each other, and that of course reflects the real rivalry in game. Sorry, not the real rivalry, the in-game rivalry between the Thessalians and the Montellis, right? This kind of like based on two real families that are also having rivalries. And if you want kind of evidence of that, of course, I'd encourage you to watch the Cantarella video, but I think the most obvious takeaway is that Cantarella is named after a poison called Cantarella, right? Like Cantarella, that was infamously only used by the Borgia family. So it's a very obvious kind of like linkage. And in the Cantarella video, I also talk about other things about how Cantarella takes a lot of inspiration from Lucrezia Borgia, but that's for that video, right? So moving on to the new addition to the grand families of Ragusa, we have the Fisher family. And the Fisher family, of course, because I usually talk about a lot of like the meta narrative with like Wuthering Waves, is most likely also going to be linked to a real Italian family. Of course, the only criterion here is that that family would have been like, let's just say, allied and like legally kind of like connected to the Medicis. So my gut instinct, of course, I'm not like exactly an expert in Renaissance politics. That's not my area of historical expertise, but my gut instinct is pointing towards the Sforza family, who was linked to Medici's and at many points in time, but was most kind of like importantly, right, legally bound by marriage. So I think there was a very famous woman from the Sforza family that married into the Medicis. I think I wrote it here. So Catherine Sforza, right? And Catherine Sforza is really famous, and the reason why I know about her is that she's actually mentioned by Machiavelli in The Prince. So she's rather like a famous figure and whatnot. And besides that as well, as we know, the Fisher family in Lilyland are heavily involved in art. The Sforza family were also quite big patrons of the arts. If, for example, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper, that was commissioned by the Sforzas, right? So let's go on to the key observations part 2. So the second kind of page of key observations is kind of like a bit of an addition to some things that we already know about. So for example, we know that Lilyland is heavily centered around cultural and artistic affairs, and this magazine really pushes that point forward because we get some extra details like how, for example, they're holding not the previously mentioned fashion month. I made a bit of an error here. It's a previously mentioned fashion week, and they hold exhibitions for growing artists, for artists that don't have a following. So new and upcoming artists, and they also showcase a lot of art which is directly quoting classical to avant-garde artworks, right? Which basically, if you guys don't know what that means, kind of like in layman's terms, that just means a wide range of different types of art, right? Because classical and avant-garde are like two sides of kind of like the spectrum of art styles, basically. So besides that as well, one thing that is also very heavily pushed that I don't think we know too much about specifically about Lilyland right now is that Lilyland seems to have a massive beauty industry. This may, of course, just be because Zani's magazine is kind of like a fashion/beauty magazine, but my impression from it, even like looking at Lilyland in general, beauty industry seems to be really big. And not only do they have a fashion week, they also have, and I think are home to a lot of brands that are famous across the whole of Solaris. And we're going to talk about why we know that later on. But we have brands like, for example, Upala perfume, a Frita hair conditioner, which is also a conditioner. We're going to talk about this later again, which is really funnily tailor-made for resonators, and we're going to talk about why we know that. It's actually kind of funny. And we also have other kind of like products, like global products like Shinny Pavilion lipstick, that all have ad placements within Zani's magazine. They're all featured in the magazine, right? There's also a really kind of like interesting thing which mentions that if you bring the magazine that Zani was holding to the Afrita like hair conditioner store, I'm assuming, in Lilyland during Fashion Week, you can even get a free sample. So it's kind of like, again, a bit of a connection between these brands and Lilyland, which I find very interesting. Besides that, what will become readily apparent is the magazine is literally just titled Voice of Fashion Lilyland Special. So I think that we can imply that all of the kind of arts and fashions that we will and have talked about come from Lilyland itself, or have, let's just say, an exhibition or kind of like a base of operations in Lilyland. So yeah, going on to the key observations, part three, ignore the meme on the left-hand side for the time being, because that's only going to become relevant once we get to the fourth point. But first things first off, there's actually also another event besides the Fashion Week in Lilyland, because the Fisher family, the AO that we talked about before, also holds a Fisher shopping festival. So we can probably assume that Lilyland is going to be a really big kind of like shopping tourist hub that brings people from all over the world. And we already know that because they literally just say artists from all over the world come to Lilyland already. So it's a pretty big tourist destination. And I find this really interesting because this is kind of parallel to the new Federation. Because if you guys remember from 3.0, this guy kind of like called Yavenga or something. I forgot his like actual name, but he's like the guy that Monya kills, like the Heliotic Six member that turned evil and wanted to like ally with the Fraxis, right? He actually had a brochure on the table that was for the new Federation. And that brochure was bragging about how there'd be kind of like just so much shopping opportunities in New Federation that you would never have enough shell credits to spend or something like that, right? So Lilyland and the New Federation in different aspects is kind of like being compared as shopping paradises. It's just that, of course, like the new Federation is like some dystopian Blade Runner California hell, and then the Lilyland is like some Florentine, flower paradise. So very different depictions, but they're attracting a very similar clientele. So besides that, I've just directly quoted something here from the magazine because I think this is it's just very revealing, gives a lot of information on its own. As the highly anticipated Lilyland Fashion Week makes its grand return next Sunday, distinguished designers and artists from the world over are converging to deliver a spectacular feast for the eye. So again, this is really just not only giving you information about how invested Lilyland is to art and fashion, but also how global the reach of this place is, which is kind of surprising because we have heard about Lilyland from NPCs all over, but not so much about kind of like its cultural heritage and it's kind of like artistic move, like kind of let's just say movements as well as also presence. We haven't heard too much about that, but it seems to be a very popular thing. Besides that, we also have two figures from Huanglong that are mentioned within this magazine. Firstly, we have a magazine that is, sorry, not a magazine, an advert in the magazine for Xinyi Pavilion lipstick, which is not only going to be kind of like featured in Lilyland. I actually lied here. I did make a mistake when I was making this PowerPoint. It has not been mentioned in Jinzhou. The one that has been mentioned in Jinzhou is this one, right? So let's move on to the fourth one. The magazine also kind of features a Lilyland exhibition, I think in the Fisher Art Museum, from a artist called Linglong, right? And Linglong, of course, like when I first saw it, I kind of got reminded by like, if you know, like there's a short series about this guy. If you know, kind of funny. But basically, this Linglong artist is a rising star in the Huanglong beauty and fashion industry, and they'll be presenting a new series of work during Fashion Week. And what's really interesting is this figure has actually been mentioned by a Jinzhou NPC substantially. And we're actually going to go through, I think it's on the next slide over here. Yep. If you go in Jinzhou, there's actually a NPC here that talks about Linglong, right? And Linglong is a designer that matches people's lifestyles perfectly. They're really famous in Huanglong, and they choose to kind of go all over the place. They seem to have branches all over the place. They have a branch in Jinzhou even. And if you know, Jinzhou is kind of like a border town. So if you have a branch in Jinzhou, you're probably like pretty globalized, right? And kind of like Linglong is a fashion icon. Her brand Longyu is like a global sensation, etc., etc. Tons and tons of stuff that basically implies that she goes all over the place and she has a global presence, right? So we already like had a mention to this kind of like person back in 1.0, but it's really nice that Zani's fashion magazine, even though we haven't discovered it for a really long time, mentions this figure. So it's kind of like brings the whole world of Roaring Waves together in a sense, which is very nice. So besides that, that's kind of like the gist for the main information that you get from the kind of like fashion four pages of like the fashion magazine. But for the people that came all the way here, if you guys want to actually read through the complete text, I will conclude this in this video as well, when we're just going to be reading this out. But I will also be posting the full text onto Twitter. So if you guys are interested or want to kind of like find it in the future, besides this video, it will be there. I also post a lot of my image-based posts onto Twitter. So if you want to follow me there, that would also be much appreciated. So without any further ado, let's go through the first part. So the cover of Zani's magazine simply just reads Voice of Fashion. That's kind of like, it's really weird because this first word is voice, and then this is voice of fashion, and this is, I'm assuming, voice of fashion as well. That's just the cover. And then the first page is going to be talking about Lilyland, right? So basically, this first passage is week to return to Lilyland. The Fisher Art Museum is posed for a star-studded week as the highly anticipated Lilyland Fashion Week makes its grand return next Sunday. Distinguished designers and artists from the world over are converging to deliver a spectacular feast for the eye. Among the constellation of talents is Linglong, a rising star from Guangdong who has already created a buzz in the fashion industry with her distinctive style and unconventional use of colors. Linglong is set to amaze the crowd once again with her new series of work. So that's basically where we got the whole Linglong thing and how that links to the NPC Jinzhou from 1.0. And then these two passages are going to be really interesting as well. This is talking about the Fisher Art Museum, which you can kind of see a picture with over here as well. The Fisher Art Museum, the largest in Lilyland, serves as the central venue for Lilyland Fashion Week. Decades ago, the Montelli family, together with their legal partners, so you can actually see here, have some like words in red. And the words in red are actually my own corrections because I think that they made some translation errors, especially this last word. I have no clue what this word is. It might be like the name of the museum or something, but you can kind of see like legal here. I think it was this word, right? It actually spells Lecal, which makes no sense. So I corrected it to legal, and that's my assumption, but it is a little bit skeptic. There are going to be some other spelling mistakes in this magazine as well. So I do think that legal is the most likely translation of this word, like over here, but I'm ready to be corrected if it doesn't end up being the case. But this is kind of like really important because this is the part where we actually know that the Montelli and the Fisher families are kind of like allied, especially legally, right? Which is a pretty big deal. So portraitist, so this is also spelled incorrectly as well. So I didn't even know portraitist was a word before I was translating this, but it's spelled Portraitists, which isn't the correct way to spell it. So I'm going to assume that it's going to be, it just means portraitists. Portraitists, as you can probably imagine, are people who paint portraits. So portraitists with great ambitions but empty pockets, their endeavor soon bore fruit today. The museum showcases works spanning from the classical to the avant-garde, which is where we got the kind of section which suggests that Lilyland hosts a wide array of different kinds of art styles. While Lilyland Fashion Week has risen to become one of the most celebrated fashion events in Solaris. You can probably imagine why, because it is a really big event. Let's go on to the second slide. Okay, how do I do this? Okay, there we go. Second slide. So this is the second slide about Lilyland fashion lifestyle, and this is going to include two sections. So this is the first kind of like section, which is talking about a product called a Frita hair conditioner. And this is kind of like just basically this section over here, which I translated. And I'm assuming it's going to be kind of like this product or something. But basically the translation is bothered by lusterless hair. Bothered by lusterless hair? Looking for a product suitable for all hair types? Look no further with a Frita conditioner. Dull hair will become a thing of the past. Use the S page. I don't know what the S page was. I translated that kind of like, S page. I think it was this section over here. So S, no, it's not because that's an I. So like you guys can probably tell now, like I can, after translating all of this, I can basically read Raganesi, which is like kind of crazy. But looking for an S. So this is an S. Like this kind of like P shape kind of like letter is an S. I think it's not too sure, but whatever, right? It was translated to S page, but I'm assuming kind of like it just means like the X page or next page. I'm assuming, but the S page, use the S page to get a free sample from the Frita stand at Fashion Week. So this is what I was talking about, how a Frita may not necessarily be based in Lilyland, but they definitely have a stall for the Fashion Week, which makes sense, right? And what's really funny as well is that in the brackets here, there's like brackets like over here. So like from here to here, it says, note, the S product, I don't know what the product is, by the way. The S product is, but I think it's kind of like the S page, same thing. The S product can be used on horns and tails that originate from resonance abilities. That is the actual translation. I found that really funny because that kind of just makes Zani the target audience, if you think about it. But besides that, also something that's very interesting, this heading was kind of like just translated to Fisher shopping. So they were missing a H, as I said before. There's going to be a couple of spelling mistakes within this section, but I'm assuming it's a shopping festival because literally anything else does not make sense. Like you can't really put any letter in between here or like changes without just turning it into shopping. So I'm assuming it's a shopping festival. Unfortunately, this kind of section, um, look, I think I could have translated it, but it would have made this agonizing experience even more agonizing. So I may translate in the future, but we just couldn't. Like we tried to skew it to like zoom it in. We avoided using AI upscale because in my experience, AI upscaling is really bad for this. But we couldn't get it to a kind of level which made translating it easy, right? So we kind of like basically gave up on it, but I'm assuming the Fisher Shopping Festival is going to be talking about the Fisher Shopping Festival. So yeah, besides that, we are going to kind of like go on to the next slide. There's also going to be one final thing over here, the Voice of Fashion Lilyland Special. That's just the name of the magazine. And this is going to be on like every page. So we're not going to talk about it again. So on the third page, we have Upala. So Upala is the other kind of cosmetic brand that's going to be talked about. And Upala basically translates to this. So Upala, wrapped in its signature scent, multiply and unleash your charming allure from city walks and workplace and parties, wherever you go. Upala, individuality, which I think is a catchphrase, is basically just an advert for a perfume, kind of like I'm assuming like over here. And this kind of like heading over here translates to Upala perfume. This passage is basically the exact same as this, it's just formatted differently. So I didn't, of course, like put a translation here, and this is just a heading. So let's go on to the next page. We have, hold on. Go on to the next page. This is page 4, and this is where we talk about Shinny Pavilion Cosmetics. So this is going to be the lipstick brand, I'm assuming, that I was talking about before. So this is going to be kind of like this passage over here, just talking about Shinny Pavilion Cosmetics. Shinny Pavilion lipsticks, when ingenuity meets cosmetics, boasting a patented formula. Shinny Pavilion's lipsticks feature a silky texture that delivers vivid color with just a single swipe, ranging from vibrant dusty rose to vintage red or berry gloss, catering to your unique style that suits every occasion. One thing that's really funny here as well is that you can kind of notice I put the L here in red. They kind of can't spell pavilion. I don't know why. You can kind of see over here, like this letter is an L, right? And it's repeated twice. Pavilion is spelled Pavilion. And they actually spell it incorrectly in the first section as well over here, LL. But in the later sections, kind of like, I think in this section, both the patent formula, Shinny Pavilion lipsticks, they spell it correctly here, which is really weird. Let me try to see if I can find it. It was somewhere. No, it wasn't that. But oh, I think it's this. Yeah, so P-A-L-I. No, sorry. Pavilions. So they spell pavilions correctly here, but in the other two sections, so like over here as well as over here, they spell pavilion incorrectly. So that's just what I was like kind of talking about when I said that in this magazine, there is some spelling mistakes, not really big ones to make this completely illegible, but it kind of proves that, of course, sometimes the spelling mistakes are there. So just have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. So besides that as well, one thing I found really interesting is that these pictures do adhere to the description. So you have, for example, 3 lipstick types. You have vibrant dusty rose, I'm assuming it's kind of like that. You have vintage red, and then you have berry gloss, right? Very interesting. So besides that, that was all the 4 kind of like pages. So big thanks for everyone for watching if you made it this far. If you found this interesting, please share around the video. But besides that, I hope you guys all have a great rest of the day. I'm going to be working on the next video, which should be the Sui Sui character analysis. But besides that, hope you all have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.